Okay, hello everyone, it's me again. Unfortunately, I don't really have a very interesting video today because I've been wasting my time playing a really shitty build that I came up with, which is basically Trinity Elemental Reave Scion. And it was honestly one of the most mediocre builds I've ever played, but since I took it to level 93, figured I'd make a video on it and just talk about it. So yeah, so the main idea was that, on the new Crucible, in the new Crucible mechanic, you can get Scorch on your weapon, and you can also get base crit, which is actually quite a lot. 1.5 to base crit chance is actually pretty crazy, as well as like local damage and attack speed. So the idea was to like get a really juiced up claw, since I dropped this one with tier 1 fractured fire damage, and then use Pathfinder Scion in conjunction with Lightning Coil and Fizz Taken As and Taste of Hate to basically get a lot of physical taken as Ellie. I think this build has 73. I have 50 from my chest, 12 from my helmet, so that's 62, and then my Taste of Hate is 11, so that's 73. So this build has 73 Fizz Taken as Ellie. In addition to 75 res, it basically comes out to be like, I think I take somewhere around like either 40 or 30% of physical damage from hits, something like that. And of course that could be even better. Well, it is better because I also have Tri-Ellie Flasks because I'm Scion Pathfinder. And this basically, in addition to allowing me to cap all my res, also gives me 20% less all elemental damage taken. So my PDR ends up being like 60 to 70% on this build. And then my elemental damage reduction ends up being like 20%. And then I also have Fortify since this is Reave and it is melee. Yeah, Fortify. So yeah, let me just like run a map really quick and then I'll just talk about the character. So I'll run this Minotaur here. This map has Fizz as extra fire and Frenzy on hit. So we'll just pop this in. So overall, the build kind of, I don't know, like the build met my expectations. I think this build is like 5 million damage in PoE. And as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. You just attack with this skill. It's basically an auto attack that has area of effect. And the explosions are coming from Herald of Ice, which is proccing because I am using Trinity. Or a Trinity build, rather. Let's skip the expedition because it takes too much time. As you can see, it's pretty average. Like, there's nothing special going on. Like, I'm killing the stuff, but it's like not very fast. It's kind of slow. The AoE is also kind of uncomfortable because like Reave does not hit behind you. Like, it only hits like in front of you. So if you like walk past the enemy for even like 1 pixel, you're gonna miss, and then you have to like aim the thing behind you, which is kind of annoying. But I mean, it's Reave. So yeah, it's basically what mapping is like. It is kind of nice to have perma uptime on everything. The only flask I don't have perma uptime on is Quicksilver. It has like 95% uptime though, which is fine, because I don't use that to cap res. So it's okay if it has 95% uptime. And as you can see, Fortify is basically up all the time. And I have, and I have 6 stages. Each stage gives me 50% more AoE. And I'm using Phantasmal Reave, which gives me +1 to maximum stages. And this dude is basically invincible for some reason. Okay. Sorry about the loot filter. It's the only way I can stay entertained playing a build like this. Okay, so I'm gonna fight Minotaur now. We'll see how theoretically 5 million DPS looks. Alright, so I gotta put 2 totems down, and then I gotta attack. As you can see, I'm shocking for 48 and scorching for like 30, which is pretty good. Although a lot of my DPS is very heavily dependent on having totems, which is kind of annoying. And I'm also getting like Giga slowed, which is also kind of annoying by the lightning. So yeah, not the prettiest fight ever. The worst thing about this build is that, your totems are basically like half of your DPS. So if the totems die, you basically lose the buff and you lose the totems hitting the enemy. So like this build has 5 million damage if everything is up. But once the totems die, you only have 2 million DPS. In addition, I was getting beamed there, and that slows my action speed, so... Yeah, overall, very mediocre build. I'm pretty sure this build can do, like, all, like, quote-unquote endgame content, but I would never take this into Ubers, I would never take this into, like, Simulacrum. Overall, it's just a very mediocre build, and that is a segue into why I think Reave sucks. Okay, so if you take a look at... how do I do this? Wait, so I pulled this up here. Okay, so if you look here, this is a side-by-side comparison of Reave and Bone Shatter, right? As you can see here, at level 20, Reave and Bone Shatter both have 250% increased effectiveness of added damage. However, Bone Shatter has 250% of attack damage, whereas it seems like Reave doesn't have any bonus to attack damage. Although Bone Shatter does have 85% base attack speed, whereas Reave has no modifiers to that. So the stats are basically the same. However, Bone Shatter has 158 to 238 added attack physical damage, and Reave has nothing. In addition, Bone Shatter has an interesting way to scale damage, which is basically trauma. You know, in a Bone Shatter build, you can normally get like 30-40 stacks of trauma on like a, vanilla Bone Shatter build. And that will basically translate to, 4 times 30, which is like 120 to 160% more damage. Reave, what does Reave have? You have area of effect, which even if you scale that to the maximum stages, it still ends up being a very mediocre skill to clear with. So basically, Bone Shatter is like mechanically better and just has like, 300% more damage than Reave. So I don't know why they don't buff skills like this. Like, Reave just has no interesting ways to scale damage. The entire skill is just like an auto attack with very bad AoE. So I was very disappointed in my experience playing Reave. Yeah, I don't even know why I played this. Oh yeah, so the original reason I decided to play this build was because I got a claw with like the Reave thing, the Reave level 5 node, which was like, when you crit with Reave, it'll summon a Spectral Wolf, which basically gives you flat physical damage. But it ended up being a very mediocre mod because the flat physical damage that the wolves give you is actually not base, it's actually added physical damage. So like, even if you have like 10 wolves and you get like 100 to 200 added physical damage, it actually only has the effect of increasing your like PoB DPS by like 100k or like 150k. So I was very disappointed in that Crucible mod, so I ended up not using it. But yeah, I guess I'll just talk about like the idea behind this character, because I think the way that I designed this character was actually interesting. It's just my skill was so awful that there was basically no point to play the build. So the main idea is Trinity Claw Reave, and I already covered defensive layers. It's basically a Pathfinder Fizz taken as defensive setup, perma Flasks on Ruby, Sapphire, Topaz, and 95% uptime on Quicksilver. And I also have this Watcher's Eye here, which gives me Flask charge on crit, so it makes my Quicksilver sustain as long as I'm attacking, basically. And then, yeah, using Lightning Coil and Fizz taken as on the helmet to basically get a lot of PDR. And then this build, other than that, uses evasion. So I use 4 evasion bases, and then I also run Grace Aura, so my evasion total comes out to be 14k. And I have a 64% chance to evade. It's not great, but it's all I could get. And then, of course, since I'm evasion, I have 100% spell suppression, which is cool. And then, of course, fortify as well, since I'm melee. And I'm only level 93. If I got 2 more levels, I could have taken Blood Drinker and gotten 16% more life. But since I'm not, I only have 4k life. I have 4.4, but I use 400 to reserve precision with arrogance. So yeah, but don't be misled here. It says 4k life, but it's actually a lot more than that because I have like 70% PDR and 20% less elemental damage taken at fortify, so it's actually not that bad. Like when I'm doing T16s, I basically never die. So, but still, I would never take this into like Ubers or anything like that. But anyway, so that covers defensive layers. And then for offense, I got this Fractured Claw. And it's basically just triple. It's like Trinity, it's a fire, lightning, and then pen. You could also put cold damage on there, which would make your Herald of Ice maybe proc more. But in my opinion, it hasn't been necessary. Herald of Ice seems to proc just fine without cold damage on the weapon. And then of course getting penetration just results in a lot of damage. And then I got attack speed as well. And then I multi-modded penetration and attribute crit. And one cool thing about this weapon is that since you can get plus 1.5% to base crit chance on your weapon for, you know, basically free, the 500 accuracy rating basically is very easy to get elsewhere. Like, because you can get so much crit chance, you can, like, look at my weapon. I have like 9.43 crit chance on a claw, right? Which is like a lot of crit chance, in addition to 1.93 base attack speed from 4% increased local attack speed here, in addition to tier 1 or tier 2 attack speed explicit. So yeah, my claw's like pretty juiced up. And then I also have Scorch here, 10% chance to Scorch. And one cool thing about this is that your totems can also Scorch. So like this build is melee, and it runs Ancestral Protector, Ancestral Warchief, and these things are actually able to Scorch as well because of this mod on your weapon. So when I was fighting Shaper, I was able to get like 30% Scorch, and that's in addition to Shock, because this is Fire Lightning Trinity. And yeah, if you do have to replace one damage type with Ellie Pen mod, you should definitely replace Cold, because having fire damage means bigger Scorch and lightning damage means bigger Shock. So yeah. And then to scale the elemental ailments there's actually a lot of scaling of non-damaging ailments on this build. You have this 20% here, and then you have the new Mastery, which gives you 50% increased effect of non-damaging ailments from crits. And then you also have 20% here on these two small nodes. So I think my total ailment effect mod is like 2.3 or something like that. I have like 20 here, 20 plus 50 is 70, 80, 90. I think I have more than 90%, but I can't remember where else I had ailment effect. Yeah, I don't remember. I think I have a little bit more, but I don't remember where it was. Anyway, scaling ailment effect is good. And then, yeah. One thing I wish I could have maybe had instead is like the interrogation. Because I think if I could have gotten Secrets of Suffering, this build would be maybe even better. Because I mean, the chill is nice, but if I had the ability to inflict brittle, then maybe I could save a couple points taking crit. Because you already get a lot of crit multi from Nightblade since this is a claw build. So there's basically no point to take crit multi. I mean, you should take crit multi if you can. But if I had brittle, maybe I could have made my crit scaling more efficient. But I didn't really have a good way to get brittle because I'm SSF. So yeah, unfortunately no brittle for me. But it's kind of okay because I still have chill. And then the build also has really good sustain because it has life leech here in addition to life gain on hit. In addition to, well, you could also take 10% of leeches instant, but I figured that I didn't actually need that. So I just didn't take it. Yeah, so that basically covers the offense. It's just Fire Lightning Trinity with penetration and Scorch and Shock and crit. And also there is this new Elemental Mastery here, which is actually really good. Hits have a 25% chance to treat enemy monster Ellie res as inverted. And so the way that you got to think about this is, like, let's say you hypothetically had like 100 damage per hit, right? And then you ran into an enemy with like cycling damage reduction and they had like 90 all res. Then your damage output over 4 hits would be 10, 10, 10, 10, right? Because the enemy has 90 res and you have 100 damage on hit. So you have like 40 damage total over 4 hits. However, if you take this node, then your damage over 4 hits instead becomes 10, 10, 10, and then suddenly 190, right? Because then suddenly the monster has negative 90 to res. and then that basically allows your 100 damage to become 190. So your total damage is 230. So if you run into an enemy with 90 all res, without this node, you have like 40 damage. With this node, you have 230 damage. So you increased your damage by 5 times against an enemy with a lot of res, right? Which is of course an, exaggerated example, but the point remains, like, with this node, you can basically get more damage against basically all enemies. So it's like really good. When I put this node on in PoE, it gave me like 500k Shaper DPS, so definitely good. Although one thing to note with this is that you want to ideally pair this with penetration, because penetration doesn't decrease the enemy's res. If you decrease the enemy's res, for example with Scorch, or for example with Elemental Weakness, then this is actually maybe bad for you. Because if you're always fighting enemies with negative res, then this is going to give you less damage. But in this game, Shaper and like other stuff like that have 50 elemental res, so my 30% Scorch is only bringing them down to 20, and then that 20 is getting inverted 1 in 4, so that's really good. And I'm trying to be careful and not getting too many sources of minus res, rather focusing on penetration. So I would not want to run Elemental Weakness on this build, or I guess I could run Ele Weakness, but then I would take off this node, but that's not very efficient. Rather, I just use Assassin's Mark as my curse, and then I get penetration, so I have like 12% penetration on my weapon, and then I have 8% penetration because I am Inquisitor on Scion, and then I have 10% penetration from Forces of Nature, and I have 16% penetration from Trinity. Or it's 50, well, it should be 16 at level 20. I don't even have level 20 gems yet. So yeah, that's basically the build. And then, and then everything else is basically completely random. I have lightning exposure here for bigger shocks. And then all my gear is basically life res attack speed suppression. Although with Reave, you also have to get AoE, because Reave scales more AoE, right? So with this build, you actually need to get a lot of base increased AoE. That's why I have like 15% area of effect here, and I have 10% area of effect here, and then I also have 20% area of effect here. So you got to get that base area of effect, and that allows you to have, better scaling with the more AoE. Although the skill still sucks, so your clear still feels bad no matter how much AoE you get, because it only fires in one direction and it doesn't auto-target. Anyway, so that's basically the stuff, and then everything here is basically pretty straightforward. Although one thing I do want to talk about is like Scion. So it just so happens in this particular build that like having a one-handed fast attacking claw build, you actually scale very, very heavily off of Wrath and Anger. So like my when I took off Wrath or Anger in my PoE, I actually lost like 33% of my overall DPS, right? So like if you can see, my tooltip is like 164. If I turn off Wrath, it goes to 124. If I turn off my Anger, it goes to like 115. In addition to having less shock and less Scorch if you turn off these Wrath and Anger auras. So basically for this build, it was very necessary to fit in Wrath and Anger. In addition to the other stuff that you need, Precision can go in Life, but you need Herald's of Ice to have like any kind of clear. And then of course you need Grace, because without Grace, your evasion goes down to 38, and then it just feels really bad. Although when I was leveling, I actually used Haste. I actually ran Haste Aura instead of Grace all the way until level 90, because I think like maps below T16 are just really easy. So I was using Haste up until then, but then I swapped to Grace at level 90. And then if I was going to do a boss like Shaper, I would also take off Grace for Haste, because you don't really need evasion in certain bosses like Shaper. And then the Haste Aura makes you move faster, attack faster, and it gives you like 300k overall DPS. So I just have this here to like hot swap for bosses basically. And then yeah, so with this build, because you needed to run all these auras, having mana reservation efficiency was really important. And it just so happened that I was able to fit in all my auras if I go Inquisitor on Scion, because that allows me to take this wheel up here, which is really efficient for reservation efficiency, because you get like 8% here, 8% here, and then 12%, which is like much more than you could get anywhere else, right? Although maybe you could also have used a cluster jewel with like, you know, a Wrath reservation efficiency 1 or whatever. But I just found this pathing to be really efficient. It allows me to get all my auras in, and it also allows me to scale my Reave AoE by taking Amplify, and it just gives me a lot of really efficient nodes, a lot of generic elemental damage, which not only increases my damage, but also increases the clear from Herald of Ice because it's generic elemental damage. One thing to note is that Herald of Ice does not scale from spell damage, but it does scale from cold and generic elemental damage. And then there's also just a lot of other really efficient stuff here. You get a really nice life node. Then you also get this consecrated ground node, which is, you know, hilariously scales the consecrated ground that you can create with Inquis. And then you get ailment scaling from this, and then you get chaos res and life up here. So it's just really good to take this. And also being Inquisitor is great as well. You know, nearby enemies take increased damage, and you get 8% pen. And you also create consecrated ground, which is not the biggest deal, but it does give you 50% reduced effective curses, in addition to like 300 life regen, which is kind of nice. So yeah, it's basically the build Scion Pathfinder, and then, you know, Pathfinder is pretty self-explanatory. 10% movement speed, 10% attack speed, you know, remove bleed, which does nothing because you still need CB immunity, which I wasn't able to get. Flasks gain 3 charges every 3 seconds, and then the not consume charges, which is also pointless. So that's basically my build. It's very mediocre. You get power charges from Assassin's Mark and frenzy charges from the Mark Mastery up here. And, you know, 100% crit chance, and then, you know, like, you know, a bunch of crit multi. I can also pull up my PoE here. Scion Reave Trinity Claw. So yeah, you have like 100% crit chance, 500 multi from Nightblade, 9.44 attack speed. This is with Shaper DPS. I have 30% Scorch, 20 Chill, and 40 Shock. Oh, I also had Fire Exposure here, which is actually not correct. I actually changed this to Lightning Exposure. So let me delete that. Go here, copy my item, and then paste it here. So yeah, I actually had lightning exposure because I figure I'm already hitting scorch cap, but I'm not hitting shock cap. So I ended up using lightning exposure instead of fire exposure. Ideally, you would have like a way to get triple LE exposure on this build, but I was not able to get it. I think you can actually get it on the weapon on Crucible, but I didn't get lucky enough to get that. Although I was able to get a shield mod that gave me ignite immunity, so that's totally good. And then yeah, so the ailment immunity of this build is actually pretty okay as well. I have ignite immunity from a shield, and then I run Garakon and Brine King, which gives me freeze immunity, and I have 100% reduced effective shock because of my boots, which have 40% reduced effective chill and shock. And then also having 50% reduced effective chill from Brine King, in addition to the 40% on the boots, basically makes it so that I only feel 10% of chill, which, since chill cap is 30%, that means even if I get maximally chilled at 30%, I will only feel 10% of it, which means I will only be chilled 3%. I think that's how it works. I don't really know. Oh yeah, and then I also had this nice Watcher's Eye here. I mean, unfortunately 4% life, but I got 48 crit multi with Anger and also Flask Charge on crit with Precision. So it's like a nice 2 mod Watcher's Eye for me. Just got lucky, basically. And then yeah, the links are pretty straightforward. It's Trinity, so Reave, Trinity, Multi-Strike, Nightblade, Inspiration, Fortify. And then we have auras, Anger, Wrath, Grace, or Haste. You can swap between Haste and Grace. Assassin's Mark, mark on hit and life tap. Melee totems linked to Culling Strike. Unfortunately, you know, you need these. And, you know, here I will illustrate why it's really annoying to play this build, because if you take these off, wow, only 2 million DPS. But if you turn these on, wow, 5 million DPS. So like a lot of your damage is like wrapped up in these shitty totems, which I hate. I really wish they would change it, but whatever. And then also, since this build is Scion Pathfinder Inquis, I was not able to path to Panopticon, so I was not able to get a totem mastery. So basically, I could not figure out a way to get active Ancestor Totems linger for 3 seconds. Although maybe there was another totem mastery that I could have taken. Oh, there actually is a totem node near me. Wait, there are 2 totem nodes near me. Oh, what? Oh, but this one's really bad. This is just like 4 points that do nothing, 5 points that do nothing just for the linger. This is also really bad. This is like totem damage. None of these do anything. So yeah, like I would probably not want to spend 5 points that do absolutely nothing just to get buffs from the totem's linger. So it's totally cringe that this build has a reliance on totems but doesn't have the linger mastery. So yeah, definitely would not recommend this build. Other than that, Herald Device, CWDT Immortal Call for defense, Precision Arrogance, and then Whirling Blades for movement. And then for the anointment, I have anointed Ash, Frost, and Storm. This is pretty meta, just gives you more elemental damage in addition to ailment scaling, which scales Shock and Scorch and Chill. And yeah, that's basically the whole build. Yeah. I'll put the PoE for this in the description for this video. The coolest thing about this build was using Scion to use Pathfinder with Lightning Coil and Fizz taken as, and then getting another damage ascendancy, and then like being able to path like in 2 different areas of the tree. That was probably the coolest thing of the entire build, although it does kind of suck that you have to spend 8 points, well, 7 points to take these flask nodes here and here, because without these you cannot sustain your flasks very well. So that kind of sucked. Oh, I should also talk about what I have on my flasks. So, you know, Taste of Hate obviously for the Fizzmet, although I am actually not using the Ailment Avoid or the Fizz as extra aspect of this. I'm basically only using this for res and, you know, PDR. And then also Ruby Flask with Ellie Res to help cap my res. And then Topaz Flask with attack speed to get damage. And then I have Quicksilver with crit chance, which is not up permanently, but I do believe with my Watcher's Eye, it should be up permanently if I gain flask charges on crit. And then for Life Flask, I have this for bleed immunity. I actually don't need bleed immunity because I have Pathfinder, which removes bleed when I use a flask. Unfortunately, it does not remove Corrupting Blood when I use a flask, and I did not get lucky enough to get a Corrupting Blood immunity jewel, and it was not convenient for me to get CV immunity anywhere on the tree because I'd have to like go here, which I don't want to go there. So yeah, I had to run this for CV immunity, which was annoying. Ideally, I have a jewel with CV immunity, and then I can run like a poison immunity flask, which would be even better. So yeah, that's the flask setup. So yeah, overall, I think this was like an interesting idea for a build to basically combine Scion Pathfinder and something else to get a lot of PDR, and then you don't have to run determination, and then you can scale your damage using a lot of ailment scaling, especially with the new mastery that gives you 50% increased effect from ailments from crits. So I thought like, you know, the scaling and the defenses of this build and like building it was fairly interesting for me. Unfortunately, I picked a skill that just completely sucked, and it was like a total letdown, and my build as a result was very, very mediocre. I probably won't be playing this anymore after this video, but it was still an interesting journey to make this build, basically. Yeah, oh, I should probably put in haste instead of grace for my POB. Yeah, gotta make that evasion look good. Okay, so that's basically the build. If you have any questions or whatever, you know, or experiences playing shitty ass skill like Reave, feel free to, you know, let me know what you thought about the video or what you think about the skill or ways that maybe this, yeah, I don't even know. My next build is going to be Eye of Winter, Poison, Occultist. I finally 6-linked my freaking staff. I have a 6-link staff with socketed gems supported by slower projectiles. So I'm going to do Cast on Crit, Eye of Winter, Poison, Occultist, Perfect Agony. I already built it in PoE. I farmed all the items for it. It's going to be sick. It's going to have no defense and probably very, very bad gameplay. And I'll probably be like a 300 death build, but I don't know. I'm going to play it. It might be interesting. Even if it's bad, I don't even care because I spent so much time farming. I feel like I just have to play it. So, yeah. I don't know what else to say. Reave, mediocre skill. Thank you for watching.